And I think that kindness is like, it's a two-way street. It's not just like the person giving you feedback, but it also has to be internal. Like just now, a second ago, when you lost your frame of thought, your go-to was to say sorry. You don't owe me an apology for that. Like you don't, but you're putting this frame around it like that you almost did something wrong because you forgot for a second what to say. But that's human. That's conversations. Like, why not instead be more inclined to be like, hold on, I lost my frame of thought. Like, give me a second, right? Just hold on. Bear with me for a second. But we internalize like, oh, I'm making a mistake. I need to apologize to you because I'm not saying what I wanted to say, or I'm not clear on what I want to say. That's okay.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intelligent Conversations podcast. Today I have the honor to learn from Sabeen Sheikh. Sabeen is an educator at the University of Maryland and teaches students how to communicate better in their professional and personal lives. Sabeen has helped students overcome that fear of public speaking, which is the second most feared thing to do in the United States, which blows my mind, by the way. Sabeen, this conversation I had with Sabeen was just very insightful. I got to learn a lot that helped me improve my communication skills as well, and also recognize, areas for improvement and also things I am doing well at. It's just the conversation I had with Sabeen was awesome. She also gave us ways on how we can help others improve their communication with each other as well. I don't want to spoil any of the rest of the show, but without further ado, let's welcome Sabeen Sheikh to the show. I'm excited to have you on today. There's three things I would say that I do this show for. Number one, I try to keep the audience in mind. Number two, I hope you have a great experience. And number three, and this is my selfish reason, I just get to learn from fascinating people. So thank you for taking the time to come on today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. And like you, I love learning. And so your podcast is one of those awesome things where these casual conversations, you just manage to have this like aha moment. And it's great because, like we live in this fast-paced world where information is constantly coming at us. And there's a lot to learn at every age. And so these types of mechanisms, like simple, easy to listen to podcasts, are so great for understanding everything. So thank you.
No, I'm glad to have you on. Just communication in general. I actually just had someone on that talked about that and kind of more of the styles of communication. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
But as you can tell, like I kind of go in cycles. It's like, all right, man, I want to improve this aspect, or so it's fun. So how did you get into communication and all that? And now teaching it is my question.
So I started with research. I actually used to work for like the Graduate Management Admission Council, who's in charge of the GMAT exam. And I would do a lot of research and a lot of qualitative research where I was paying close attention to how people react to different products and services, and became really interested in like testing anxiety. And then that kind of led me to just being interested in anxiety in general and just like learning how to read people and the behavioral science behind why we say the things that we say and what compels us to like not say certain things. And then I was also in a lot of positions where I was presenting this research and honing my own communication skills. And I started noticing, even for myself, when I initially started presenting a lot of research, I was getting really anxious, and I never had that before. Like I feel like I grew up with a lot of attention. I was always center stage and never was afraid of having eyes on me until I started doing research presentations. And then I was just like, I need to figure this out. Like, why am I feeling this way? Mm-hmm. And then that actually took me right into, I think other people might feel this way. Let me see if I can get more involved in this community. And now, I've taught various communication courses at the college level. I've done intercultural communication, family dynamics, intercultural. But for the past 10 years, I've just been focusing on the public speaking and principles of oral communication. And at this
That's
point,
brave, right?
I've seen it all. I've had students pass out. They stood
Hmm.
up to present and literally fainted. I've had students come up and completely blank and be like, I can't do this and I need to sit down. Um, and like it's substantiated through research. It's the second most feared thing in America. Number one is heights. Number two is public.
Dang. And not even death, right? Like,
No, people are more afraid of public speaking than like the death. Yeah, like they'd rather be in the coffin than give the eulogy.
that's true, right?
Yeah, it's a problem because it should not be to that level, but it's and I understand like we are as a society like your instinct kicks in where like survival instincts kick in if you're worried about rejection or judgment, right? You feel like you can't be in those situations and you want to get out of there. And I think that has a deep connection to like, is my audience going to think I'm dumb? Am I
Hmm.
actually dumb? And then you go through it and something happens where you make a mistake and you're like, yeah, I'm dumb.
Yeah.
And it's a vicious cycle.
So I guess kind of how do you break out of that cycle? Because I find even just sometimes, right? I mean, when we hang out with friends or whatever it may be, right? Even just casual settings, it may just be like you say something, you're like, that maybe did not land the way I wanted to. How do you kind of, I guess, break that cycle and maybe either correct it or, improve it so that maybe it doesn't happen again?
Well, I think first we need to understand why are we second guessing ourselves in the first place? Like, why isn't it just okay to like fumble on your words and be like, oh, that wasn't the right thing to say. Here's what I meant, and like fix it. Even if
Yeah.
it's like whether it's in casual conversations or at a speech in front of an audience of 30 to 100 people. Like it does. I think the stakes that we put around these conversations has a lot to do with how we perceive it, right? In a casual
Hmm.
conversation with a one-on-one friend, if you say something and you say it
Yeah.
incorrectly, you can laugh about it and casually like fix it. But why can't we have that same protocol in a more professional or a higher stake situation where there's a lot of people watching you? You're still a human being. It's okay to
Hmm.
make mistakes. And I think everybody thinks like you just can't mess up if you're talking to a group of people. And especially if it's like in a professional setting, whether it's a presentation, whether it's in the classroom or at a conference, you absolutely you can't mess up. And that's the
Yeah.
narrative, right? And that's a problem because that's causing the anxiety. Like if I am not allowed to make a mistake, how can I do this and feel good about it? Because I'm going to make a mistake. You know what I mean?
That's true. Almost just embrace that you're going to make mistakes in the presentation. You could even, I guess, make it part of your style too. Like, oh, there's another mistake, right? And then just
Yeah, like own it. Like self-deprecating humor tends to make people a little bit more uncomfortable. So you don't want to like call
yeah.
out on it every time. But there's also like research that shows that when we engage in like negative self-talk, it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I see with a lot of students too, like if they had one public speaking experience that didn't go well, like either they messed up or they got a bad grade because something didn't go right, that almost forms like this trauma in their mind. So now they're telling themselves they're not capable of doing it. And then when you're tasked with doing it, because you've been telling yourself, I'm not good at this, I can't talk in front of people, everyone's going to be judging me, and you're constantly engaging in that vicious cycle of negative self talk, then it's like a self fulfilling prophecy. You're going to get up there
Hmm.
and you're going to bomb, and then you're going to just be like, yeah, I can't do it. And so that's one big part of the problem is the negative self talk. Sometimes it's shaped because of a negative previous experience. Sometimes it's just because you're not used to having all eyes on you and it makes you
Yeah.
nervous when people are paying attention. And that's valid. Like I get why people might feel that way. But I always ask students like, why do you care so much what other people think?
Well, that's like every human being, right? Wait, what's there's like a quote. It's like everyone goes and tries and do things to make people they don't even like show off to other. I can't remember the exact words, but it's like you do things that you don't like to impress the people that you don't even like. It's like
Yeah.
why would
Yeah.
you even?
Why bother? Right. Because if someone is genuinely interested in what you have to say, they're not going to be bothered by the one or two times you may have said something incorrect. or, and there's a difference between like falsifying information and actually not knowing or making a mistake, right? There are lines that we need to draw in terms of what we expect from other people. But this idea of like perfection and telling ourselves like we're not allowed to mess up, and then telling ourselves we're not even capable of like doing it, I think that's forming a lot of the anxiety around, especially like college students today. Like when I see them coming up, the walk to the front of the room before a speech, you see it in their face, they just want to die.
Yeah, right. And it's quiet too, right? Like no one, because everyone knows. It's almost like a shared experience. They're like, oh, it's his turn. It's like he's walking up to the execution block or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And it's pin drop silence, which only further, I think, adds to like the shakiness that's in their soul
Yeah.
at that moment. And like last semester, I had a student who came up to the front of the class to give her speech. This completely silent for about 30 seconds, right? And then she starts crying. She's just like full blown having like a breakdown that she can't do it. So everyone in the classroom was trying to cheer her on, and they're like, no, you got this, you can do it. And as wonderful as that was, having 20 people like shouting that you can do this is also not helpful. So she stopped crying, but she was still like freaked out that like, okay, guys, like I think you think I can do this, but I don't think I can do this. So I had to tell everybody to like, quiet down and give her a minute. I'm like, just take a deep breath. Start with what you've prepared. What would you like to tell us today? And let's do baby steps. Let's just start with the intro, and it was, I think that was like a 5-minute presentation. She made it to minute 3, and then I just didn't even have it in me to like make her keep going. I was like, you know what? Why don't you go ahead and have a seat, take a breath.
Yeah.
Everyone gave her a round of applause. She did do a little bit better the next time, but she had to work through a lot of these ideas of like, she had anxiety because English was not her first language. So she was worried that people weren't going to understand her. And because of English being her second language, she was putting a lot of pressure on her to like, if I can't pronounce a word, they're going to not understand me and everything's going to fall apart. And I had to tell her, like, if you mispronounce a word, there are fluent English speakers in the room that can help you. We can correct you.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and we're almost more than happy. Right?
Exactly. And if we get the general gist of what you're saying, that's enough. Like, we don't have to understand every single word. And if we don't understand, we can ask questions and be like, what did you mean when you said this or that? And it's okay if you get a question and you say, that's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm going to have to look into it. That adds a whole other level of like anxiety when there's like the Q&A after a speech, because now everyone's going in with this idea of like, oh, if they're going to ask me questions, it's to test me or trip me up. And that's not at all the motivation. It's just to enhance your understanding of something. But we go in feeling anxious and then we get defensive, and it's just such a spiral of negativity for so many people. And I think we need to overcome like so much, but I think negative self-talk is a huge element. Like telling ourselves we're not capable, it affects our self-efficacy, and then we believe it.
It's true. And I would say that's one of the things that it comes down just to the person as well, right? Where that's the one thing they can control. It's like, all right, the words you're putting into your mind, that's up to you to decide. Of course, there's going to be other factors, but the thing is you can always go and learn and try and improve over time. And like, let's say you don't, maybe it's like, I don't know, just like what you said, pronunciation, you can work on that, right? You can go out and, like you said, get feedback. Whereas, just that talk that's going on in your head, that's the one thing that no one really can help you with, I would say. And that's solely dependent on you.
It's completely dependent on you. And it's kind of like, how if you're having like a really bad day and someone tells you, oh, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay. That's not the cure to making you feel better, right? It's not until you tell yourself, I'm going to be okay, that you'll actually feel better. Like other people's support and complimentary words, as nice as they are, they don't change sort of the mental way that you're looking at a situation, right? Like what's going on in your own head and what you're telling yourself about a situation, that has the most impact on how you're going to perceive it, right? Like other people can tell you, oh, you're doing great. But if you yourself don't believe you're doing great, it's almost meaningless, right? Like feedback is key though, I will say, but it has to be very specific feedback. Right? Like if we tell someone something like, oh, that speech was great, that's kind of meaningless. It's nice. It's a nice to hear.
Yeah.
But what about it was great. I have to be very specific with my students. And the reason that I do that is so that that's something that they'll remember. That's something that they're going to hold on to. And that's actually going to shape that inner self-talk, right? Because you're not going to hold on to something vague like, oh, I did a great job. You will hold on to something like, I was really effective with my eye contact during the introduction of my speech, or I did a great job with starting my speech with a startling statistic to get everybody's attention. Specific feedback, that's what we internalize. That's what we remember. And even more so if it's negative, right? If someone specifically says, you really messed up when you said X, Y, and Z, you'll never forget that you said that.
It's true. And that last statement, especially, it reminded me of something my coach said. And it was when I ran track a while, way back when. And he said something, he's like, positive, like reinforcement, like for each compliment you get, like, it's for each negative thing that goes through your mind, it takes like 10 positive things to like get out of that cycle. And it's like you said, it's really vicious. And I like that you said that it needs to be specific because, right, it's something that one, they can hold on to. It's like, okay, let's work on that. I did that good. And it also, right, kind of builds up that confidence, but it also, I don't know, I maybe this is just how my mind works, but I'm always like searching for like, all right, how can I improve? Like I craved kind of that, all right, let's find that mistake that we made and fix it type of thing. So sometimes those comments are almost like a relief. It's like, oh, I actually did do something good. Yeah. And so I guess kind of where's that balancing act of like, I still think you want to push towards improvement, but like not let that negative self-talk kind of, does that kind of make sense? Like not let that negative self-talk like rule you.
Right. Yeah. Because whether it's positive or negative, you don't want it to rule you, right? Because if it's positive, you're not going to recognize areas for growth. And if it's all negative, then you're not going to necessarily feel like you're capable of growth. So it has to absolutely be a balance. And so I think, the strategy that I tend to implement with not just with my students, but also even with my kids is like, if I give them specific positive feedback about something that they did well, that will come first. And what will always follow is here's an area for growth. And so, and also being really mindful of how we frame that, right? It's not positioned as a mistake. It's not positioned as a flaw. It's framed more as here's what you did great. Here's what you can do better, right? So now you're attaching this like growth mindset to it because it's all about the mindset when it comes to self-talk and when it comes to anxiety associated with communication. Like, how are we framing it? Is it a growth mindset? Because we're never, even though I've been teaching it for years, and I always start every semester with this, is telling people I'm not an expert, right? I'm always learning. I'm always saying something and backtracking and being like, man, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have said this instead. And that's the beauty of communication. Like, while it's something we consistently like are growing on, we can also recognize when we are doing something really well and like hone in on that. But you also have to understand that it's something that you're going to continuously grow upon. And having this understanding of like the way that you and I communicated 10 years ago is not how we communicate now, because your life experiences and your worldview shape how you want to be perceived and how you perceive the world. And that impacts how you communicate. And so the growth is always there, whether you recognize it or not. But when you're actually looking at feedback specifically to like public speaking skills, you have to, the way that I frame it is like, here's what worked well. Here's what you're doing great. Here are your areas for growth. And so that frame around it allows a student or an individual to feel like, okay, here's what I need to focus on. And then now I need to figure out how do I actually do this better, right? Something a lot of people struggle with is eye contact. Eye contact makes everyone so uncomfortable if it's more than 3 seconds. Like, I think it's partially because we're so used to looking at phones and screens.
Yeah.
But when there's a person or live people in front of you, you're just like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with my eyes. I'm just going to look down.
No, it's true. We're all guilty of it, right? And
absolutely. And like more than 5 seconds is weird. That's just the
Yeah.
reality of it, right? And so if I'm saying like, okay, your eye contact could be improved, now I need to follow that up with some specific strategies. Like it's not enough for a growth mindset to hear that you have an area for improvement. How do you actually go about improving it? So then it needs to come down to like different strategies depending on where the issue lies, right? So for some people, it'll just take a couple of like practice sessions where they're recording themselves and just looking at the camera. They just need to be like more still, and it's a matter of like too much movement. For some people, they're so uncomfortable by it that I have to like tell them to set like an internal timer. Look at one person on each side of the room for at least 3 seconds, but in a natural way, not like where your eyes are darting because then it's
Yeah.
weird, right? So I have to give them like different strategies for like how do we actually work on this particular skill. Some people struggle with things like vocal fillers. And so for that, again, they need to record themselves. And then I tell them to like actually count and to keep a tally of how many times did you say like? How many times did you say basically? These are
Yeah.
fillers. These are not words that are contributing to an intelligent conversation, right? And so like that's the thing
Right.
about it. Like we have to have first the frame of there's an area for growth, recognizing it not as a mistake or a flaw, but like here's something you could do better. And then following that up with here's how. Here are different things that you can try. So you feel like empowered. You feel like, okay, there's things I definitely did right. There's things I can do better. And there's ways I can try to do better. So you're set up for success rather than hearing something ineffective like that was a great job,
Yeah.
or you can do better next time.
Exactly. That reminds me of something one of my family members actually has been trying to drill into my mind, and that's you can there's a lot of nice people, right? And that's in no short supply, but there's not enough kind people. And I think, right, it's almost right, you're doing them a service when you say, hey, look, you didn't do so hot here, but hey, there's, like you said, frame it in a way, like a kind way. That's what
Yeah.
they've been trying to drill in my mind. Frame it in a way that, sorry, my mind blank, but frame that, frame that sentence in a way, or that feedback that you're giving to someone else or someone, whatever it may be, in a way that's helpful and kind, right? Because, like you said, it empowers them. And especially, I liked how you said to add some sort of action plan as well, because then it gives them a chance to be like, okay, now I know what to do
Yeah,
moving
exactly.
forward. Instead of just this, you did a great job. It's like, cool story, man. And I mean, that's actually something that gets on my nerves sometimes. It's like, just tell me what I need to improve on. And then
Yeah.
like, I'll do it. Like, trust me, I'll work on it. But
And I think that kindness is like, it's a two-way street. It's not just like the person giving you feedback, but it also has to be internal. Like just now, a second ago, when you lost your frame of thought, your
yeah,
go-to was to say sorry. You don't owe me an apology for that. Like you don't, but you're putting this frame around it like that you almost did something wrong because you forgot for a second what to say. But that's human. That's conversations. Like, why not instead be more inclined to be like, hold on, I lost my frame of thought. Like, give me a second, right? Just hold
yeah,
on, bear with me for a second. But we internalize like, oh, I'm making a mistake. I need to apologize to you because I'm not saying what I wanted to say, or I'm not clear on what I want to say. That's okay. It's a live conversation, but you can process information at your own pace. And if you need a minute to like collect your thoughts, that's okay. And I think that another part of that's connected to that is this idea that like silence is awkward. Silence is golden. It means you're thinking. It means you're being thoughtful, right? And that's kindness to yourself and the person that you're talking to. That you're critically thinking about what you're going to say and how it might be received to keep that conversation going further.
well, thank you for that. I didn't even think about that too. It's just subconscious, right?
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is like we just put these internal cues in our minds of like, I can't say this, or I have to say this, or I should speak this way. But these rules are so arbitrary. Like everybody is speaking from their heart or their mind and should be given the time to do that. But everyone's timing is different, right? Like some people take a little bit longer to collect their thoughts and be responsive. And, and I think it's more forgivable in a one-on-one or like a small group conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it should be permitted even in public speaking. Like, and I almost do it sometimes on purpose. I will admit, like, it's a little bit staged, but I do it because I want students to see that I've forgotten what I needed to say. And I'll just be like, hold on, I lost my train of thought here, guys. Like, what were we talking about? And like, I used to be afraid of doing that because I was like, they're going to think I'm dumb and I'm not prepared. But then I was like, I don't really care what they think. This is in service to them. Because if they see me doing this, they'll be okay with doing it themselves when they're standing in front of the class doing their presentation. Like, it's okay to say things like, hang on, I forgot what I was going to say next. Let me rethink this for a second. Or give me a minute as I try to figure out what my next point was going to be. Or that's a really good question. I'm sorry, I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm going to have to get back to you.
And I would even say that's an opportunity to engage like the other person, right? Yeah. Because like you said with with how you do it with your students, I think that's also like you kind of how you framed it as a question. It gives them a chance to be like, oh yeah, like this is what you were talking about. And then it helps you kind of organize your thoughts even quicker. Yeah. And it engages them. So now they're more interested in talking with you and like what's next that you're going to say. Because and it also shows that they were paying attention, which I'm sure is helpful as a teacher.
Absolutely. And it kind of, I think it humanizes the person that's like speaking at the front of the room, right? Like whoever, whether it's an educator or a presenter, like when you're fully engaged with your audience, even if it's in a format that like where they're telling you what is expected of you, like that makes you seem like, okay, this person is approachable. Like, and then you're more inclined to pay attention when someone is speaking anyway, because you feel like I think when it comes to communication, it's like 75% about how you're saying it and 25% is the what. What are you actually saying, right? Like I could be making all kinds of stuff up with you, but if I'm doing it in a way that's approachable and relatable and a little bit of humor here and there, you're going to engage with me. Maybe it won't make sense later, but in that position, you're into it, right? Because it's like it's about how I'm talking to you and how I feel like I'm communicating that it's important for me to engage with you, like through eye contact, through vocal variety, through the pacing of my speech and how quickly or rapidly the words are coming out. All of these things play a role in how you are thinking she knows what she's talking about, or I want to listen to what she has to say. It's less about what I'm actually saying.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a science behind it, right? And
absolutely.
Right. And there's certain things that you have to do. I remember watching actually a video a while back and it was just, typical sales stuff. And I was like, all right, a lot of it was whatever. But there's actually 3 parts that I kind of wanted stood out to me. And it was like 60% is what like your body language. And then another percentage like your tone of voice, like you said, pacing, all that stuff. And it's like 5% is actually what it is you're saying. It's like, okay, this is great, but it's the stuff that you do to engage other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I forget the name of the guy, but there's actually a TED Talk, and the title of the TED Talk is How to Sound Smart in Your TED Talk. And the guy that's delivering it, he has no content. He's literally just making stuff up and saying random things. At one point, he's even talking in gibberish. But you can't stop watching it because of the way that he's delivering it. He's funny. He seems charming. He seems like somebody you would become friends with relatively easily because he's just kind of this like goofy character. And it just is further proof of this idea that like you could literally say whatever it is that pops into your brain, but how you're saying it is what's going to actually connect you to another person. And that's why we need to communicate, right? It's all about connection. And like with public speaking, audience connection is 100% dependent on the way that you're speaking to the audience, right? Like, are you smiling with them? Are you moving around? Do you like the people that are robotic, rigid, not moving, and have the content memorized? They may have all of their facts and research-based evidence, but it's like listening to a robot. Nobody's engaged. No one's paying attention. And and if you ask them follow-up
Yeah.
questions, they'll be like, I don't know.
Yeah, they're kind of, that kind of goes, I mean, I don't want to but it goes to kind of the tone of voice, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if you're just saying the same, like kind of that monotone, right? They say
Yeah.
that you want to avoid kind of the monotone. You want to, volume, I've heard, is important, right? You want to go intense volume and then kind of quiet, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's legit, but
Absolutely. Just because you know how sometimes if you're listening to someone talk, you'll know just based off of their volume and pitch when a certain word or a phrase has more emphasis on it, because they'll be like louder at that point. Like, you have to do this, right?
Mhm.
Like, so that's compelling you. There's some sort of action that they really want you to take. Like, their voice just is louder with certain parts. That has this, like, we have this internal response when we hear people put emphasis on certain words, even if we filtered out everything they said before that point. That part of that conversation is going to stay with you because of the way that it was said. Whether it was something was louder, or they had like they clapped their hands, or they slammed the table or something, depending on what the conversation's about. But it's like emphasis on certain words is highly dependent on tone, volume, pitch, and rate, and it's verbal, but at the same time, non-verbally kind of communicates importance on a certain point, and it gets your attention. Even if you were like completely tuned out before then, you're like, oh wait, now this is important. I know it's important because of the way that it was said, not because of the content itself. The content, processing that content, obviously that has its place, but that comes later once you're actually paying attention. But that's how you get someone to pay attention, right? Like that vocal vibe. The monotone speeches are a nightmare. But the monotone speeches are the ones where all they care about is like, I need to say all of these things, because they're just focusing on, this is what's going to make sense. And so that's all that's important, is that I make sense. And that's the problem, because that's not the number one thing that you need to do when you're communicating. Every time you're opening your mouth, the number one thing you need to do is connect. You need to connect with one other person. Whether it makes sense or not, that's to be determined later. Because if you and I are connecting and we're having a conversation, if I say something that doesn't make sense, you now feel comfortable asking me for clarification, right?
Yeah.
And that's connection. That's how we actually learn. But if I'm just focused on, I have these facts, I'm going to say them in a robotic, monotone manner. I'm not going to, I might know what I'm talking about, but 30 seconds into it, you'll be like, yeah, I don't care about this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the delivery, because even if the information's good, like you said, that stuff you're sharing is good, again, drives your point home. It's the delivery of that information that matters, because especially in today, I mean, that's why social media and all YouTube, all those platforms have blown up, because it's an opportunity to engage with someone on the other side of the screen. And if you're not like doing things that aren't engaging, or gets their attention, or whatever it may be, the information that you're sharing, they could care less, even if it's really, really good stuff.
Yeah, it's about how.
It's about the how that matters.
But unfortunately, social media has also created such a difficult dynamic around communication, because like these teenagers are, obviously there's so much data to back up that they are all addicted to it, right? But this very curated online persona is what they're comparing themselves to. And so if they feel even a little bit less than when they communicate, now it's even more emboldened by like, I don't sound like her, I can't talk like her, I can't engage people like her or him or whoever, right? And so it puts this false narrative in our minds that like, I'm not going to be that engaging, I can't speak to people in this way, right? And then, or it's the other thing that's happening is people feel very empowered and emboldened and confident behind a screen, completely disappears in front of a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm definitely one of those. I would say I fall into some of those categories.
And like, it's human nature. There's sometimes we're all on, and sometimes you're having an off day. But when you're online, you're always on, right? And so that also builds this false narrative and expectation, especially with young people, I think, that they need to always be engaging. And if they're not, they don't belong or they shouldn't speak or they're not capable. And that negative self-talk starts right there because they're coming at it from this idea of like comparison, which is the thief of all joy. And that's what I feel like social media is doing for everyone, right? But it's like, it's curated and it's, well, you don't know how many times they've recorded that. You don't know how many times they've messed up, right? Like
That's fair.
the most polished version of it, but that doesn't mean that they're always polished every time they open their mouth. And not, nor should that be the expectation. But I think that social media is definitely putting a huge amount of anxiety on people when it comes to their communication skills, because it's this expectation of like in full engagement all the time, which is impossible to achieve. And then there's also like the added element of anxiety of having a live audience or live conversations rather than a recorded one. And because everybody is a star behind a camera.
Yeah, right. No, it's true.
It's definitely a part of the problem, I think, unfortunately. Like, I mean, I don't want to knock social media. I understand that it has its advantages in a lot of ways, right? Audience engagement, like you were talking about, like there's definitely, we can assess who we want to listen to and who we want to follow because of their online presence. And people can be super captivating. But then the other side of it, especially in the classroom, like I see the other side of it. And it's really hard to tell students that, you know, you're not like, we're not looking for influencer level communication skills. Like that's not the go-to. That's not the goal.
It almost affects development, right? Like of that communication. And I would even say like, even the people that may like, to your point, they're throwing on their best version as well. Also, some of the people that are out there, it took them years to learn how to communicate that way in the first place. And so, like you said, I'm guilty of it too, right? You compare yourself to that person. You're like, man, I want to be like that, right? Be that good. But then you don't see the years and years of work that they put into getting that good.
And I think like with communication skills, it takes a lot to even get your mind wrapped around the idea of like, it is actually a learned skill because you've been doing it since you were born, right? And so when you've been doing something since the day you were born, you're going to assume you're doing it right. You're doing it well. It's been working out so far, you know? It's something we actually do need to like actually like pay attention to and work on and willfully like try to improve. And it's interesting because like, you know, at the university, there's students that are coming from all over the world. And so I've seen in some high schools now, they do require communication courses. Some colleges like mine, they do require, like my course is a graduation requirement, regardless of your major, because it is a skill that everyone needs to have. But I feel like these are classes that like, I think only some high schools are doing it, but I think it needs to be at the elementary school level, middle school, high school, college, and it needs to be a part of professional development. It needs to be a lifelong plan to like improve because you're always going to be doing it. Are you aware of how well you're doing it? Are you aware of where you need to grow? Like,
it's true. There's no deliberate practice, which I think I've found that's actually pretty helpful. That when you actually turn your mind on to be like, all right, I'm going to deliberately practice this.
Yeah.
And then it slowly like kind of meshes into one.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. It does. Cause like it's just it's a process. It's not something that you like, whether it's public speaking or interpersonal communication, whatever the type is, it's a process. And so if like at the elementary school level, if we start working on like having kids just understand better listening skills because kids don't listen, right? They need to be taught how to listen. They need to be taught how to pay attention. And because like there's research that shows if you're actually participating in active listening, your body's physical reaction to it is that similar to a workout where your heart rate will increase. You may even perspire. Your entire body is fully engaged when you're actively paying attention to someone.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Because it's not just about your mind. All of your senses are fully engaged when you're participating in active listening, right? And so and it's one of those things that you can totally fake, and the other person thinks you're doing it because you're making eye contact, but in reality, you're thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch later. And
yeah, It's
and that's part of the problem, because like if kids aren't taught at a young age how to actively listen, then why do we as adults get annoyed when they're not doing it when they're teenagers? Were they taught how to do it? Maybe
maybe.
not, right? Like,
Yeah.
and there's a difference between like the physiological element of being able to hear you versus listening to understand you. Most people are listening to respond to you, which is also not enough listening. It's not
Yeah.
fully engaging, right? And so listening is a huge element of communication that gets completely overlooked. And then, and it's to a student's detriment, because by the time you are in college, you're a full-time university student, you're listening 80% of your day, but you were never actually taught how to do it in an effective manner, like, and that matters. Like I have a daughter who is in sixth grade, and in fifth grade, they learned how to take notes properly and how to organize their notes. And so
Okay.
that facilitated better listening skills, because she had like a whole plan of how she needed to take these notes. What were the main ideas? What are questions? What are follow-up things she needs to research? So she was listening for specific pieces of information.
Hmm.
That made her more engaged, and that made her a better learner in the long run. But it wasn't until fifth grade that even came up in the school setting, right?
Yeah, I didn't even think about that too, right? By the time you get to that college level where it is mostly listening and you haven't even developed that skill, and
Exactly.
you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, 'cause, like, at the college level, then you're listening to either respond or to regurgitate, because you're going to be tested on it later. But
Mm,
it's a very different thing to listen to someone to actually truly understand and absorb and retain information. And they're only doing that in the classes that they're enjoying. Like, but then it's selective listening. It's not,
yeah,
that's not what we're going for. If you're 80% of your day is listening, but 20% of it is when you want to listen, then, it's a disservice to the student and the educator.
interesting. That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It opened my mind to whole new. So
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you, thank you for that. So I hate to wrap this up. I want to be respectful of your time, but if people want to find you, reach out to you, take your class, whatever it may be, what's the best way that they can do all that fun
So
stuff?
if you could Google my name, my university page will show up. I'm associated with University of Maryland as a lecturer there. I also actually do communication coaching one-on-one with people to help, and that varies from like teenagers to adults. So Google is probably your best bet. I'm in the process of getting a website up and running, but it's not quite there yet. So and I can give you my email address if people reach out to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sabeen, for coming on today and sharing your knowledge. I learned a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It means a lot to me to have this dialogue with someone that's like doing such great work. The intelligent conversations that you're having are a service to like a worldwide community, and it was an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. All right, everyone. As you can tell, that is Sabeen Sheikh. She's a very intelligent person, has great things to share. I challenge you guys, if anything spoke to you, or if you're interested in receiving coaching from her, to reach out to her. I'm sure she would be glad to help you. Stay tuned till next week. We have a great guest lined up for you guys. See you guys next week, and let's get after it. Hey everyone, if you liked this episode and would like to hear more, be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button. We release a new episode every Wednesday for you guys to listen to. Thank you guys so much for the support that you give. We could not have done this without you guys. If you would like to be a potential guest on the show, check out intelligentconvos.com and fill out the form there. Thank you guys again, and let's get after it.